So, as if game development wasn't already hard enough, I can't imagine the amount of stress devs go through when they're tasked with creating a sequel. Not only do you have to provide more of the same, but you have to find a way to make that same loop feel different somehow, and add entirely new features to justify its status as a true sequel in the hearts and minds of your players. You have to simultaneously please both fans of the first iteration and newcomers alike. One misstep can send you careening down the perilous abyss of gamer discourse, which is a hell I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemies. With so many things working against you, it's no wonder that so many sequels can end up feeling kind of half-baked. But it's not always doom and gloom. Sometimes a sequel is just the thing a dev needs to fully realize a game's true potential. Franchises like Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs and, well, honestly, largely Ubisoft benefits from this, but there's others too. These franchises have 100% improved upon themselves by being able to take another shot at it. I'm happy to report that Remnant 2 is that kind of sequel. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot that I liked about the first game, but I'll be honest with you folks at home, I did bounce off of it pretty hard. It was probably due to a combination of other games I was looking forward to that were releasing within the same time frame, to some mechanics I didn't find particularly engaging. In the end, I wasn't blown away by what I played and ended up kind of dropping it pretty early on. I may not have been too taken with it, but that doesn't mean that the first Remnant didn't come with its fair share of fans. As time went on, Gunfire Games decided to take on the burden of a sequel and announced that Remnant 2 was indeed on the way. Fast forward about 4 years and we now find ourselves here. 2023 can be characterized as easily one of the best in gaming yet, with one incredible title after the other dropping every single month. Yet against all odds, it seems like Gunfire Games has done it. Remnant 2 is, without a shadow of a doubt, an amazing time. It cuts out the fat and leaves behind a perfectly executed rework of the original concept, evolving every single aspect of it until it comes out the other end polished with a fine sheen. Spoiler alert for the rest of the review, but I ended up liking the game a lot.
So, Traveler, your friend will be fine. I'm Bo Ward, and this is Ward 13.
You search through the ash and dust. You reach for someone to trust.
Remnant 2 acts as a direct continuation of the first, and thankfully it's written in a way that rewards players who are already invested in the first game without alienating newcomers. Decades after the root has been mostly excised from the world, we take the reins of the Traveler, a passerby making their way through the post-apocalyptic landscape of a ruined Earth alongside their friend Cass. While players from the first game may have eliminated most of the root from this world, its influence is still very much felt throughout this place. You and your friend are on a journey towards the fabled Ward 13, a refuge for those attempting to mete out whatever existence they can in a world on the way to recovery. But, as luck would have it, you and your friend happen upon some trouble, which sees your character now sporting a trendy new sucking chest wound. Before you can make your peace and head towards the spirit in the sky, the beasts are held back by a terrifying magical presence, which is the handiwork of Clementine and Bo, denizens of Ward 13. After rubbing a magical Jolly Rancher on your chest and making all the boo-boos go away, they grab you and your disease-ridden friend and escort you both to Ward 13. While the local doctor helps Cass heal her rot affliction, which is a process I can only assume is closer to the act of actually pruning a bonsai tree, you take some time to acclimate yourself with the town and its folk. This inevitably leads you towards meeting Ford, the legendary founder of Ward 13. And strangely enough, he seems to have been expecting you. After helping you get comfortable and outfitting you with some new weapons and armor and a fancy new archetype, Ford asks you for a favor. Nothing too crazy, he says, he just needs the assistance of a strapping young scrapper such as yourself. But, of course, things never turn out the way that they're supposed to. Ford leads you to a bunker housing the old Ward 13 where the World Stone lies in wait, a giant red crystal that's capable of peering into other realms. Upon reactivation, Ford and your new friend Clementine, who just so happen to be stalking from very closely behind, get sucked away into the World Stone, presumably now stuck in another world. With no other option available, you do what comes naturally and start your new isekai adventure by grabbing hold onto the crystal and get sent hurtling towards another realm far, far away. At some point during your travels, the larger plot at hand reveals itself to you, and you are tasked with the objective of going to different worlds and eradicating powerful monsters to obtain a story MacGuffin that can ensure the continued existence of not only humanity, but reality as we know it. You know, simple stuff. All of this culminates into a cliffhanger ending that kind of came out of left field for me, but Gunfire has already stated that there will be 3 whole DLCs coming out at a later date, so I guess for right now this is okay. While the plot is serviceable, like most Souls-likes, or Soul-likes, or however the hell you say that goddamn thing, Remnant 2's strength lies in its overall world building. Unlike its predecessor, no time is wasted in getting you into the thick of it. Whereas the first game's introductory segment was heavily bogged down by exploring the largely uninspired cityscape, from the jump, you are sent reeling towards entirely new dimensions. From the terrifying alien world of Nauru to the beautifully dark forest of Yeisha, Remnant 2 is not for want of amazing locales. The hub world of Ward 13 holds everything together, which has been given a massive makeover this time around. Over the course of their adventure, players can periodically take breaks by making their way back to Ward 13, either to pick up supplies, upgrade their weapons, or fraternize with the locals. Ward 13 is chock full of fun and unique personalities, like Whispers, the gentleman who speaks with a whiteboard, or Old Mudtooth, a crazy old coot whose stories are so wild that even he's unsure of their overall veracity. It's this simplistic premise that still acts as a decent motivator towards shooting and looting your way through the different planes of existence that you'll find yourself in. At its core, Remnant 2 borrows heavily from the Souls-like formula, which includes having a large majority of the storytelling happen via a combination of the old-school environmental storytelling and strategic NPC placement. You also have the ability to inspect items that you can pick up in the world a la Resident Evil, which can help expand upon a world's history or even point you towards possible puzzle solutions. The world of Remnant 2 is an intriguing one, no doubt, but at times can end up feeling disjointed. This is honestly par for the course when it comes to a Souls-like. Silly people like me who love running through an area at light speed might not stand around for long enough to smell the roses, and because the game doesn't force you in any way to interface with the story beyond the main campaign, you can sprint through the thing with reckless abandon and you won't be worse for wear. I love having the option to play however I want, but I still feel like maybe having an introductory cutscene or two occur whenever you spawn into a new location could have gone a long way towards helping to establish the overall tone of the setting. All of this is brought together by one of Remnant's prominent features, the dynamic playthrough. Utilizing procedural generation to create different tile sets every time you visit a new world, Remnant 2 can also flip the script on you in more ways than one. Each of the worlds in Remnant 2 have 2 separate storylines that you can spawn into, which dictate your campaign's overall progression. One moment, you might be roaming the dilapidated ruins of a Victorian hellscape, and at the next, exploring the world of the Fae, roaming the bowels of a gilded castle in search of its royal patrons. Replayability in ARPGs is one of the most important things to realize, and these dynamic playthroughs offer the best excuse imaginable for loading up another round of New Game Plus. If you slow down and take the time to truly invest in it, Remnant 2 is a game flourishing with all manner of incredible tales. Being born witness to the devastation left in the wake of the Root's influence on each world is fascinating. Here's an idea. Don't do what I did. See, I wanted to get this review out in a decent amount of time, which caused me to run through a significant portion of the game faster than I would have liked. Instead, you should really take the time to soak in the experience, because those that do will be handsomely rewarded in both a metaphorical and a literal sense. More on that later.
The last of your kind left me for dead. That is when they found me and offered me their enlightenment.
If the year were 2012 and machinima still existed, you can bet your bottom dollar that you'd see these dudes and many like them come out of the woodwork to simply write this game off as Dark Souls with guns. Which I think might have been a somewhat apt comparison when referring to the first title, but not so much here. Gunfire Games have done an exceptional job at expanding upon many of the first title's mechanics in ways that really make Remnant 2 feel like its own beast. So much so that I wouldn't be surprised if people start referring to games of this ilk as Remnant-likes from here on. The main gameplay loop is as follows. Players are tasked with exploring wide open levels of full winding paths on their way towards freeing large beasties from the shackles of life. You do ultimately have a main goal, but you can absolutely find yourself straying from the beaten path to take on one of the game's many side dungeons. It may be somewhat rudimentary in design, but ARPGs never needed to be anything more than vehicles for all sorts of player-induced mayhem, and Remnant 2 executes this perfectly. Many levels can feel downright labyrinthian in nature, so it's a good thing that the game comes with one of the best minimap designs ever. The minimap in Remnant 2 gives you a clear indication between areas that you've already properly ransacked and places you haven't seen before. On your travels, you may also encounter all manner of secrets and puzzles. While these have always been a standard in Souls-like games, Remnant 2's approach to secrets is quite unique. Hell, just the other day, an entirely new archetype was discovered by the community through data mining, and that was by design. They knew they couldn't stop these dudes from plundering the depths of the file, so instead of putting up barriers, they actively rewarded them by making an integral part of solving an in-game secret. Wow. But that doesn't go to show you the lens at which Gunfire has gone to really make this game feel special. I don't know what could. Procedural generation is a fantastic boon to this game's overall replay value. On top of the ability to switch dynamically between two available storylines, the game uses this mechanic to consistently create new tile sets between each of your playthroughs, meaning there will be several instances in which you still might not be able to fully explore the extent of each world on the first pass. The differences can actually be pretty staggering, from different NPCs showing up, to dungeon locations being mixed around, all the way to entirely different boss encounters. Lyle's running his own campaign alongside mine, and he's fought bosses I didn't even get to see in my first playthrough, which is kind of crazy to think about. What's even crazier is that Remnant 2 likes to go beyond the binary. There will be several moments in each of the world's storylines which you can make a choice, which can end up affecting both the world itself and the loot that you receive. Bosses even have alternate kill methods which produce different loot possibilities, adding more onto the madness. After completing an area, players can re-roll that particular world if they so choose. This is an amazing addition, as it means you don't have to wait till New Game Plus to try your hand at exploring all that the world might have to offer. Many people can use this to go ahead and try to find more gear, or if they hear about a new archetype that's within a particular map instance, they can absolutely re-roll the world and have the ability to go back and visit it whenever they want. While I did end up taking most of the experience solo, Remnant 2 is at its best when played with friends. If you're new to the channel, you probably don't know this, but I fucking love cooperative games. From the moment I loaded up Perfect Dark with my uncle all those years ago, to the times I played Lost Planet 2 with my old crew, the co-op genre has been one of my all-time favorites. Sure, I still had a ton of fun with the solo experience, yeah, but there really is nothing like loading up a playthrough with your boys and experiencing the absolute insanity that can occur at a moment's notice. Easily one of the funniest moments involved some top-tier in-game shenanigans. While playing with Lyle and Kyle, there was a wide-open space we discovered during our time in Narude. It had the look of a boss arena with a shiny piece of equipment just sitting right smack dab in the middle of it. It was an obvious trap, but we're not the brightest tools in the shed when you get all three of us chuckle fucks together, so suffice it to say, Lyle goes and picks up the item for us, only to be met with a giant floating orb that was seemingly invincible and had a penchant for sucking up everything that was within a 5-foot radius around it. We stayed far away from it, didn't really seem like much of an issue, till we left the area and realized the fucking thing had been chasing us down the whole time. This led to easily one of my favorite in-game experiences with these guys, as we ran throughout the level attempting to fight our way through the dungeon while the orb that must absorb stayed at our backs at all times. Remnant 2 is full of emergent gameplay moments like this that exemplify why the co-op is an absolute blast to go through. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Take the time to explore the world, and you will be rewarded greatly with new experiences and all sorts of goodies. And speaking of loot, let's talk about the crazy world of character progression in Remnant 2. So, character progression in Remnant from the Ashes had a lot of really neat ideas, like the trait system. When you travel around the world, you can encounter certain situations which would trigger the activation of stats, which were rewards that went towards upgrading your character stats for accomplishing certain actions. These could range from a trait that increased the amount of HP you had while you were downed, or having an increase to your base firearm swap speed. The problem was it sort of operated on this kind of proficiency system. The intention was to reward players for completing a certain number of actions and then associating a stat to said action to help someone's character feel truly unique. At least that's what I got from it. The only problem was that a lot of these stats felt relatively inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, while the actions needed to unlock them felt needlessly grindy by nature. It was an interesting idea on paper, sure, but it ended up making progression feel stilted and unnatural. You'd have to find guides just to make head or tails of the system in a vain attempt to pick up traits that were actually worth a damn. Thankfully, Gunfire Games has heard my plea and worked towards streamlining many of the game's systems, with one of the largest changes coming in the form of the reworked archetype system. Originally, Remnant gave you the choice between 3 simple classes that ultimately struggled to feel different from one another. Sure, they all had different base stats and gear, but there was no substantial focus on the class identity. This time around, however, players can choose between 4 starting archetypes, with an additional one appearing in the form of the pre-order exclusive, the Gunslinger. It seems like Gunfire Games created these archetypes with an increased focus on establishing overall class diversity and making the class fantasy feel far more engaging by comparison. Classes like the Handler can see you teaming up with a canine companion that can be leveled up to take on either a defensive, supportive, or combative role, while the Challenger, which is the scrapper, stronger, more ripped cousin, is built from the ground up to accommodate players who feel more at home swinging a giant chainsword into the faces of their would-be aggressors. Each of the archetypes come fitted with a staple of universal buffs in the form of perks, which help supplement both the trait and class skill systems by offering you and your team buffs and utility that they may not have had otherwise, such as the Challenger's Intimidating Presence perk, which debuffs enemy attack values upon a Challenger's skill activation. To add even more fuel to that fire, players who've discovered engrams of other archetypes can even assign themselves an additional one to create devastating multi-class options, with the only caveat being that the prime perk associated with the secondary archetype isn't accessible to you. As if that weren't enough, Remnant 2 also has hidden archetypes that can be discovered throughout your playtime, which open up even more exciting gameplay opportunities, such as having access to the highly specialized Engineer, who can summon heavy weapon types at will to even the odds, or the Invader, gives players the ability to tap into the power of the Root and become a shadowy assassin type. Traits have also received quite the facelift and feel much better this time around. Long gone are the times in which one had accomplished an arbitrary set of goals just to be able to increase a relatively boring stat. Now, traits are doled out to players in one of 3 ways. Through the core traits that each starting class have available to them from the get-go, the mainline archetype trait, which gives you a unique buff that aligns with the class fantasy, and unlockable traits, which can be acquired by simply making your way through the campaign. There are a lot of traits that do still require a bit more of an involved process towards unlocking them, but it goes beyond the traditional subquest of killing an X amount of enemies with a particular weapon type. Some traits require you to make key decisions during each of the world's storylines, which can ultimately affect which trait you end up with. Gunfire Games have also taken care in adding traits that feel like they're actively working towards making you feel more powerful and go beyond simple things like increasing fire weapon swap speed to stuff that feels a lot more tangible, like adding base lifesteal to your damage or increasing the amount of mod power that's generated. The system gets more intense when you factor in archetype traits, as they remain as permanent unlocks if you max an archetype's levels. These traits can then be leveled up and utilized regardless of whether or not used in the class it belongs to, giving players the ability to slowly but surely become gods among men. And we haven't even gotten into the absolute monster that is the loot itself. Remnant 2 eschews the loot pinata design employed by most ARPGs, and instead opts for a more nuanced approach that is, dare I say it, better in the long run and outclasses the likes of competitors like Outriders or Borderlands. This isn't the kind of game where you're hit upside the head with a piece of loot every 5 seconds and have to take time out of actually playing the fucking game just to see if the same copy-pasted piece of armor you picked up has a bigger number than the last. While it is far more tame by comparison to other ARPGs, it makes up for the lack of quantity by establishing more quality and asks the player to dedicate time towards exploring the environment to find rewards as opposed to simply killing monsters. And look, I'm not saying that the loot pinata can't be fun, but it's nice that Remnant 2 doesn't feel beholden to that and tries to go for something more unique here. While most of the rewards are centered around exploration, that's not to say that simply following the mainline campaign isn't going to reward you with something worthwhile as well. Most of the time, you could probably just make do taking down bosses and picking up whatever they drop and still have an abundance of loot opportunities that can help diversify builds and create new gameplay dynamics. The primary stat upgrades that are available also don't fall victim to the miserably early game circumstances that other looters might, like offering some scant 2.75 increase on seemingly useless numbers. The numbers here make an absolutely huge difference in playstyles, and you will 100% feel their influence on you far more directly than you do in any other ARPG. Think of how Diablo handles uniques, but then attach that same property to almost every piece of loot available. Sure, it's not as immediately satisfying as other ARPGs that thrust hundreds of different loot options your way, but I would argue the slower burn makes it all the more satisfying when you see that familiar purple glow on the ground. And this is me just going off the cuff to kind of talk about one of the builds that we have. There's essentially a couple of rings that we ended up finding that all fed into one another, where you could fire a certain amount of bullets in your gun, and that would activate a shield. And then there was another ring that we had that we kind of like worked alongside that, where that shield could then increase in power by the amount of HP we had at the time. And it was just like this amazing feedback loop going back and forth with the thing that It's really fun. I like the way that the game's itemization works. There's a lot of amazing things you can do with it, and every single item you pick up does something wildly different. Relics also have the chance to become different, which are the little Estus flasks that you actually can find within the campaign. And you can find a relic that essentially turns your heal into sort of a heal that you can throw around to everybody in the area around you, or it is you can basically use it to supplement your lifesteal damage. But at the risk of going completely off kilter, let's go back to the script. All of this is in service of a combat loop that is downright addicting. Effortlessly switching between intense gunfights and all-out fisticuffs, Gunfire's reworked combat feels far more dynamic when compared to its predecessor. Remnant 2 is more than just aiming down sights and putting shots between the eyes of anything that has more than 2 legs. The combat is bolstered by several key elements that turn the game into a unique pastiche of precise gunplay and magical abilities, with stuff like weapon mods, mutators, and an expansion on melee moves going a long way towards making the combat feel truly kinetic. For instance, melee in the first game felt like sort of an afterthought, but here, you can just as easily create a melee-centric build and get by just fine. In fact, the melee expansion includes new baseline combos and moves to help each of the weapons feel more unique in their overall handling. This, alongside the weapon mods, which can add an even more explosive magical element to the combat, adds so much more to the fun. As you take down each of the game's most powerful bosses, you're rewarded with a crafting material that can either become a high-powered weapon mod or an entirely new weapon. These mods can range from putting an attachment on your pistol that fires parasitic eggs that burst into alien babies whose only purpose it is to feast on unwitting enemies, to summoning otherworldly tentacles that root aggressors in place. Finally, mutators can help you add additional values to your weapons by employing properties that allow you to boost certain things on a more granular level, like weapon mod damage percentage or increases to weapon charge speed. And you'll need all the power you can get too, as the enemies in Remnant 2 are without a doubt some of the scrappiest motherfuckers I've seen yet. Even in the game's normal difficulty, which is veteran, combat encounters can be fierce reminders of the extent of your own mortality. With an emphasis on large amounts of enemy variety, incredible boss encounter design, and environmental challenges that can add to the whole affair, Remnant 2's combat is stellar and has the chops to compete with some of the best in the AAA market. But alas, not all that glitters is gold. While most of my experience with Remnant 2 can be categorized as a match made in heaven, I do have a couple of cons I'd like to discuss. First, while Remnant 2's art style is an absolute treat for the eyes, I still can't help but feel like my computer shouldn't be performing this terribly. Granted, I do have an older rig using a 1080 Ti, and this is one of the first games released on the new UE5 engine. The game even utilizes the latest nanite tech for all sorts of neat stuff, but to play it at an acceptable frame rate, I did need to utilize the included Intel upscaler instead of its performance, which is why most of the footage might seem a bit blurry. This is not as big of an issue most of the time, but there are definitely moments where the game can throw a lot at you, and it brought me down somewhere to the tune of 30s and 40s per frames. Also, don't get me wrong, I just spent the last couple of minutes talking about how sick the loot in this game is. For the most part. There's a cavalcade of different items you can find in your adventures, but more often than not, most pickups will wind up just being another ring. The rings themselves normally come with amazing build-altering abilities, but it did deflate some of the hype behind a discovery, especially concerning the fact that I didn't find a single piece of armor during the entirety of my first run-through. I could have bought some from NPCs at Ward 13, mind you, but I was expecting to find a lot more in the environment, only to get ring after ring after ring whenever I saw that familiar purple glow, so that became a little bit frustrating after a while. It's not a huge blow since armor doesn't come with set-piece bonuses like the first game, but it still would have been nice to find something out there to help me change my style up a bit. And yeah, Remnant 2 controls like a dream, and the ability to jump back and forth between ranged and melee effortlessly makes for an incredible time. But to engage in the ranged gameplay, you are strictly forced to aim down sights. Normally, this isn't much of an issue until I got to some of the larger boss encounters. Due to the game's natural FOV when aiming down sights, some boss maneuvers just end up being obscured, which could lead to moments that felt like it cheapened the overall experience as a whole. While I think the added mobility from firing from the hip would make the game a tad easier, I still think it'd be a worthwhile addition just for the sake of visibility. And I will sit here and sing praises of Remnant 2's secret and puzzle design. It is some of the most unique secrets and puzzles I've seen in a game by far. But there were 100% moments where things felt entirely too esoteric. Sure, I had the critical thinking skills of a 4th grader, but I can normally get by without a guide, as long as I have a good idea of what the puzzle is asking of me, which is kinda half the battle with this game. I wouldn't give it up for the world because it adds so much to the identity of Remnant, but I still feel bad that I would ultimately have to look up guides to unlock some of the cooler aspects of the game, like a lot of the hidden archetypes. And finally, I also unfortunately ran into my fair share of glitches. Most basically ranged around the AI screwing up here and there to finding myself stuck on the level geometry, which is a little bit more infuriating, and having to unalive myself to get free. Thankfully, I encountered no game-breaking glitches, so here's hoping it stays that way. Small caveats aside, Remnant 2 is an incredible experience the whole way throughout. With every reroll, I can feel the addiction getting worse, with each loop calling out to me, beckoning me further into its grip. Remnant 2 is a wondrous time, with or without friends, and I highly encourage anyone looking to jump right in to convince their homies to come along for the journey as well.
I'm a setting sun, but I'll never run. I'm a dead man walking. I'll stay and fight as long as I'm alive. I'm a dead man walking. I'm a dead man walking.
In the face of tons of competition, Remnant 2 defiantly stands above the rest. Everything here is so good that it's honestly concerning how easily this game outclassed some AAA releases in the same genre. Remnant 2 truly is the best example of the perfect sequel. It brings everything fans loved about the first game and expands upon it in ways that not only serve as an amazing starting point for newcomers, but an incredible return to form for fans of yore, all the while breaking the chains of comparison to establish its own identity. I cannot stress this enough. Remnant 2 is absolute ARPG excellence. If you're a fan of looter shooters, you owe it to yourself to play this game. If you're a fan of Souls-likes, you owe it to yourself to play this game. If you have a pulse and play video games, you owe it to yourself to play this game. Even in the face of the few faults it has, Gunfire Games have done an exceptional job of elevating Remnant 2 to that of a must-play status. So, that being said, Remnant 2 gets a 9 out of 10.